This is the brand new CineBack for A7 series cameras, and in this video I'm going to break down all of the new features on this guy, as well as some compatibility notes. Below this video there will be timestamps if you want to jump to different sections of this video for more information on the different modules and instructions on assembly. This is very similar to our very popular FX3 CineBack, with a couple of exceptions and a couple design features that are exclusive to these A7 series cameras. Out of the box, this version of CineBack is going to work with the following cameras you'll see on screen, and we'll have some notes on compatibility here in a moment. But first, let's do a basic overview of this particular version of CineBack. First and foremost, we have the camera here in the front, sandwiched between two giant cheese plates and a bunch of other good stuff in between. So on the top of the camera, we have a ton of room to rig up really anything on both the top and the bottom or the sides or the back and front of CineBack. On the operator's side, we have an area for the screen to flip in and out of, and it's nicely protected by some foam here, so you can use the screen as you see here, or flip it closed if it's not in use. You'll also notice there is a power switch on this side, which will send power from the V-mount battery on the back of CineBack through to the other side via 4 D-tap connectors here. There's also what we call the vanity plate, which is removable right here, and that allows you to stick cables up underneath the vanity plate and run them throughout the rig. For example, if you wanted to run D-tap power through to the other side and power the camera via USB-C power delivery, you could do that through the top gap here or the bottom gap. And we also have other areas to run cables. So this is removable, and you can add other accessories, which we'll talk about in a little bit. On the rear, we have the D-tap battery plate, which can be used with your standard size or large format batteries, no problem at all. There is a lever release on the left side behind the camera's display, and of course it pairs beautifully with small form factor batteries for a more lighter, more compact setup. New to this model of CineBack is a new fan adapter, which allows you to mount a tilt-a-fan directly behind the camera for additional cooling on the A7 IV. This version of CineBack is also compatible with our XLR extension kit, allowing you to mount Sony's XLR handle on top of your A7 IV and A7s III. So now I'm going to remove this camera, and we'll talk about camera and cage compatibility with CineBack, as well as what comes in the box and how to put it all together. In the box, you are going to find the main CineBack base unit, as well as the hardware necessary to mount your camera and cage inside of CineBack. There's also some additional parts that will allow you to use the fan module and the XLR extension handle kit. At launch, this will all be included with the A7 series CineBack, but in the future we may separate this out into its own separate product for those that need it to keep the cost lower on CineBack. Last but not least, in the box you'll get a camera Foundry sticker. Next, let's talk about camera compatibility and cage compatibility with CineBack. CineBack is compatible with the A7s III, the A7 IV, the A7r IV, A7r V, and A1. All of this will work with CineBack, but there are some compatibility notes to be aware of. All of those cameras I just mentioned work with this cage from SmallRig, the SmallRig 3667B cage. We have designed CineBack to also work with the older 2999 cage for the A7s III, but the 2999 cage does not work with the XLR Handle Kit and will require shims and a 3/8 to 1/4-20 adapter. With all of that said, we would recommend going with the newer cage and skipping the older 2999 for compatibility purposes. Next, we have a note on the fan module, which is only compatible with the A7 IV. It is not compatible with the A7s III. To get the Sony XLR handle and our XLR extension kit to work with CineBack, you're going to need to purchase this adapter from SmallRig that bolts down to your cage, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The last compatibility note I have is for the A1 and A7r IV. Those cameras have a fixed tilt screen and they do not have a flip out screen. This means that the screen of the camera will be blocked by CineBack. To work around this, you can turn on info display and view the menu on an external monitor. And you also could remove the vanity plate here so that you could reach in and touch the back of the screen if necessary. But CineBack really shines with the A7s III, A7 IV, and A7r V. Next, let's go ahead and install our camera in CineBack. We're going to start with the SmallRig 3667B cage. Then we'll talk about the 2999 cage. So I'm going to set that older cage aside. And the first thing you're going to do is take CineBack, stick your camera in through the front. Now, it's very important at this point to flip the screen out or it'll be trapped and you'll have to take things back apart. With the screen flipped out, go ahead and insert the camera between the two metal plates. And you'll want to make sure that the eyepiece sets back in behind the screen cover. So you'll see this piece of plastic here. The eyepiece is nicely hidden behind that point. Now we're going to flip the whole thing upside down and we're going to line up that 1/4-20 on the camera cage with the slot here. Once things are aligned, go ahead and take one of the included socket screws and attach it to the cage. Before tightening all the way, I like to slide all the way forward on that slot, tighten it down. Not too tight, we'll come back to that in a second, and we're gonna flip the camera over and address the two slots here at the top. As you can see, I've done this a lot of times on this plate, so we've got some nice wear marks. So I'm gonna go ahead and take another one of those same screws, do the left side, now the right side. Before tightening everything up, you can kind of slide left and right to get things nice and centered, and then tighten things down all the way on all three of those screws. Next, we can flip over to this side and close our screen, and you can take a look at alignment. We want the screen to be parallel with this screen protector, which is going to keep things from getting damaged. If it looks crooked, you can loosen the bottom screw and slide the camera forward and back a little bit. Also keep in mind, I'm using the Peak Design little strap attachment points here, but you could go ahead and bolt the camera down to your cage using this little adapter here. From here, we're ready to go. We can insert our Sony battery into the grip of the camera or use a dummy battery that goes from the D-tap to the camera, or use a combination of the two and use D-tap to power delivery, and we'll talk about power options a little bit later. But now, let's talk about using the older cage with the A7s III. Okay, I've got the A7S rigged up in our 2999 cage. To get this cage to work with CineBack, you will need to add a 1/4-20 to 3/8 adapter in the back bottom of this cage right here. Let's go ahead and install it. So we're gonna start by flipping the screen out, and we're going to insert the camera and cage in between the two metal plates. Now I'm actually going to remove it again to show you the problem with this older cage, and that is that you might be able to tell the hot shoe of the camera actually sticks out higher than the cage. So we're going to use some spacer washers to insert this into our cage. So we're going to stick the camera back in, slide it back in place, flip it upside down. Here's our 1/4-20 socket screw. We'll go ahead and get that installed. I like to have it all the way forward in this slot, then I'll tighten it down. Not super snug because we might adjust it later. With things flipped over, we're going to use two of these spacer washers in between the plate and the camera cage, and we're going to put them right here and here for those two mounting points. So I'm going to stick it in from the side and the other one from the other side. Grab them from the inside with a screwdriver to line them up with the threads. Just like that, and now I'm going to use our two socket screws to secure the top in place. Once you're happy with alignment left to right, we can snug those two down, and then we'll flip the cage onto the side and check our alignment. Again, we want our screen to be parallel with this screen protector here, and you can see it's a little skewed. So I am going to loosen the bottom screw that we put in earlier, and you can see we can bring the camera back or forward to fix that alignment. Almost all of the time, having this screw all the way forward will keep things nice and straight. And that is how to rig up the A7S with the 299 cage in CineBack. All right, now let's dive into fans with this version of CineBack. So there's 3 fans that work and that we have tested. The first is going to be the Ulanzi fan. What's cool about this is it'll work with any of the cameras that work with this CineBack. All you have to do is flip it over and follow the instructions on installing this on your camera. Next, you would remove this vanity plate and use a smaller little cover here so that the battery has room to go behind the camera but not bang into this larger vanity plate. The next two fans are kind of unique because they actually mount directly to CineBack and are all bolted down and have cable management and all of that fun stuff. That is the tilt-a-fans for the Sony ZV-E1 and the Sony A6700. Both of these will work with this version of CineBack. I also really love these fans because unlike the Ulanzi, which just blows on the back of your camera, these actually have circuitry that will convert hot to cold and vice versa. So this gray silicone pad here will actually get really, really cold as it transfers heat to the other side and blows it away with this fan. We've got a USB jack here, and we've got a power switch with 2 modes on the other side. So I'm going to set this Ulanzi aside because that's pretty straightforward, and we're going to talk about mounting one of these fans, and we're going to focus on the ZV-E1, but the process is the same for the other fan. So the first thing we need to do is remove the stock vanity plate, this larger cover here, using these 2 screws here. With that done, we can pull out the vanity plate and set it aside. Next, we're going to take CineBack and flip it onto its back. You'll notice down here at the bottom, there are 2 threads for use with our fan adapter. So here is the fan adapter. It is going to allow us to mount up our fan. And we are going to install it in this orientation right down here on CineBack like so. Take the 2 included M4 screws and mount the fan adapter right here. Don't snug it up too tight. We don't want to strip anything, and you really don't need a lot of pressure. Next, we'll take our fan and using these slots here, mount it to our fan mount. So simply line up that top slot there with those 3 little holes and use the 2 smaller M3 screws to mount in place. Next, we'll mount our camera, but you will be able to see that we can adjust the up and down motion with these 2 larger outside screws and our left and right motion with these 2 smaller screws mounted to the fan. So for now, keep these loose and we can kind of insert our camera and get this moved just to the right spot where the camera just fits beautifully and the back of the camera touches against this gray pad. So I'm going to take the camera, slide it in with the screen flipped out, and that's pretty close. I think it needs to come down a smidge, so I'll go ahead and make that adjustment. And I am pretty happy with that fit. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt the camera down to CineBack. Just like that, we have the fan installed. Now, if you need it to be a little further forward, you can use the 2 included washers on the back of that mount to slide the whole fan forward. But as long as it's remotely close to that camera screen, or the back of the camera rather, you're going to be just fine. And then if we flip things over and flip our screen out of the way, you'll notice we have a slot built in here to connect power to the USB-C jack. There are multiple ways to power the fan. You can use any form of D-tap to USB power, or you could use your battery's built-in USB jack if it has one. For this example, I'm going to use a battery with a USB connector on the top going to USB-C, and we're going to add the battery to CineBack. I'm going to run the cable into the side slot here. On the other side, I'm going to feed it back through the other side by the screen. Here on the screen side, I'm going to pull it into that slot, flip it over, and plug it in like so. And then I'm going to take the excess and snug it up so that it's not bent or kinked in any way. The beautiful thing with this setup is we can still close our screen without any kind of damage to the cable or the screen, which is really slick. It just kind of hides everything. Now we'll flip things over. I'm going to add our vanity plate back. Instead of the larger one, we're going to use this small one. It just slots right here, and we're going to use those 2 M4 screws we had earlier from the old vanity plate. And with that done, we now have a really fantastic fan hooked up to our A7 IV. So currently it is turned off. I'll flip the switch to number 1. And if it doesn't turn on because I'm plugged into the battery, I can press the battery button. And just like that, we have a super slick fan setup. Now, you do need to keep in mind that this fan is very particular about the kind of power it gets. So it might not work with all batteries or with all cables, but once you find a combination that works, this is a slick little setup. There's even a slot right here for your thumb to be able to reach in and turn on and off the fan. So that is getting a fan set up. Now let's talk about getting the XLR handle system to work with your A7 series CineBack. Now we're going to get the XLR handle extension kit set up with the Sony XLR handle and our A7 IV or A7s. This will require you to have the CineBack base as well as a Sony XLR handle, our XLR handle extension kit, and this SmallRig adapter that adapts the FX3 and FX30 XLR handle to A7 series cameras. The first thing we need to do is remove these 3 screws and this top plate on CineBack. Now we'll replace this stock plate with the custom plate from the XLR Handle Kit. Now this is removable so that you can have a full plate for kind of a cinema mode, or take off the front half and use it with the XLR handle. So now we're going to use this back half on CineBack. With those 3 screws tightened and the plate aligned, next we'll use this cage stop and install that here on the bottom plate of CineBack. So what you're going to do is take this, it has little keys on it so that it doesn't slide around, and we're going to place it right here so that it doesn't move around. I'll flip it over so that you can see from the other side that we have those 2 tiny pins keeping it from moving, and you should be able to see the arrow just inside of this slot here. While holding that down, we're going to insert screws here and here from the bottom of this plate, and it should now look like this. Now we can take our cage and back it up against that block so that it can't go back any further, and bolt it down on the bottom using another socket screw right here. I flipped the camera around, and now we can add that SmallRig adapter, which is going to go right here on our cage. I very loosely added it here, and now we're going to set the camera aside and talk briefly about the XLR extension kit. So you're going to take your handle from Sony, you're going to add this metal piece on the back that extends the handle, and there is a place to insert a 1-inch socket screw right here. Once that's done, you're going to add this top NATO rail with 4 countersunk quarter 20 screws. And you want to make sure this area locating 3/8 thread is all the way forward, not here at the back. The back, there should be nothing. If you wanted to, you could then add another SmallRig accessory, this little top plate that is designed by SmallRig, but we're going to leave that off for now, and we're going to install this on our camera. So let's bring this back into frame, and at this point, I personally like to add the handle to the camera and very carefully get things lined up. So I'm going to slide that forward onto the cold shoe, and I'm going to thread the Sony screws into this little adapter from SmallRig before I bolt it down to the cage. I like to make sure it's nice and aligned and the camera's happy, the handle's happy. Then I'll go ahead and tighten these 2 smaller SmallRig screws. So now I'll tighten that one and this one, and now things are starting to look pretty good, with exception to the rear, which is kind of dangling here. You'll notice there is a gap, and that's because it's designed for the FX3, but we've made this little spacer here. So we're going to insert the spacer in between the 2, and I'm going to use 2 of our longer socket screws to go ahead and bolt this down onto CineBack. And with that done, we now have an XLR handle for our A7s or A7 IV. You could try it with other cameras, but those are the 2 we've tested it with. And obviously the camera is going to sit a little further forward. This might mean you might be able to get that Ulanzi fan in there, which is kind of fun. And then of course the cherry on top, if we wanted to, we could add that SmallRig plate right here. Now we've got a fantastic documentary style setup with that top handle. So that is how you can use the XLR handle extension kit, Sony's XLR handle for the FX3 with SmallRig's little adapter and CineBack for the A7 series. Before we wrap up this video, I want to talk about power considerations with CineBack. I've mentioned this switch here on the side, and what that does is take the power from the V-mount battery and send it to these 4 D taps. What's really great about this is that there's no power leak. So if I add a battery to this rig, and let's say I have a ton of stuff connected to these D-tap connectors, if I flip that switch off, I know this battery is not going to be drained by my rig. I can take this whole setup, drop it in a camera bag, and not have to worry about power being removed or slowly trickled out of this battery. When it comes to getting power into your camera from the battery, there are a couple different options. One simple one that I personally and several other people have been using with CineBack for a while is a simple dummy battery. This takes the D-tap connection from the side of the CineBack and runs it to a dummy battery that goes into your camera. Now, this solution worries a lot of people, and I get it. Something could go wrong with, the battery or power and damage your camera somehow. I'm not recommending you use this. I'm also not recommending that you keep your camera turned on all the time and you use the power switch to cold cock the camera. That said, I do it all of the time, and that's exactly how I personally power my CineBacks, is using this power switch for everything on the rig. Not gonna recommend you do that, but that's what I do, and take that with a grain of salt. A safer solution, and one that is becoming very popular, is to use a D-tap to power delivery like this one from Condor. So we've got D-tap on one side, power delivery USB-C on the other. You could stuff this inside the rig, and then you would keep a battery inside of your camera, turn it on, and the battery from your V-mount would essentially be charging and helping power the camera. That's a great solution. It kind of gives you backup power as well. If this battery dies, you've got one in the camera. So a very elegant solution. The last thing I want to mention is the D-tap connections and making sure you're using them properly. Now, most cables are going to have a very clear rounded edge on one side, making it impossible to plug them in backward. That said, some people have told me they were able to use certain cables in the correct way. So make sure you use them correctly, not incorrectly. Make sure positive is going with the positive side, negative with the negative side. A lot of people are also upset that the cables are going backward in their mind and not forward. There's a reason for that. If all the cables are going forward, you're not really able to use the grip of the camera. That said, if you don't use the grip of the camera and you want your cables to go this way, not this way, you can actually open up these cables using that screw and removing this nut here and flip the cable so that it's actually coming out the other side. Just make sure you switch the cables and the connectors so that negative is always negative as stamped here on the plastic and positive is always positive. Make sure those don't change, that you're just moving the cable to this side, that you're not flipping those. Then your cable is going to go out forward instead of back. So you can still make things work with your CineBack. So that is an overview of the new CineBack for the A7 series cameras. I hope you guys enjoy it. Check the product page for more information. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.